very, very warm welcome to everyone joining today. Thank you so much for joining us from all over the world. As you might have heard, there are over 3,000 participants registered for this conference. So we're just so thrilled to have so many people, and so thrilled that so many people are interested in this, what we think is really, really fantastically interesting session. And yeah, we can't wait to spend the next 90 minutes with you. So hopefully you are somewhere comfortable, that have a cup of tea or coffee, so that the next 90 minutes are really interesting to you as well. My name is Mentee. I co-lead the digitalization portfolio in a GIZ fund called ICTforAg, the Fund for the Promotion of Innovation in Agriculture, together with my colleague Johanna Braun, who is also in this call and who you'll meet shortly. And together, we were thinking and brainstorming last year on this topic of data sovereignty and what we can do in our GIZ ICTforAg portfolio. And ultimately, after 1 year, we're very happy that the culmination of that brainstorming will be presented to you shortly, because we commissioned a study which was conducted by Dalberg Data Insights, the authors who you will meet shortly, on this topic of data sovereignty. And today we want to answer this question with you on what is it? So introduce you to the conceptual information behind data sovereignty, and also answer the question on why you should care about it. Because that's something last year which Johanna and myself really thought about. There was so much information on data privacy and responsible data use, but we often wondered, what do we need to think about when it comes to control over data, especially for smallholder farmers and agricultural value chains? And that led us to thinking we really need to deep dive and commission a study, and here we are today. So today we will really be looking at this topic of what does a control over data really mean for smallholder farmers within this concept of data sovereignty. We will especially look at what are the risks and the missed opportunities if we do not address data sovereignty and if we do not adequately address it in our work. So hopefully these answers will be discussed. We have a really exciting program for you, and for the next 90 minutes. And in order to know who is in this call, I will hand over to my colleague Johanna, who will introduce you to the great speakers who we've lined up today. So Johanna, over to you.
Thanks, Elke. Very happy to be here today, and also a warm welcome from my side. So I have the privilege to introduce this session on this very complex but also very relevant topic of data sovereignty. We're very glad that with us here today are Christophe Bouquet and Joan Kirungi from Dalberg Data Insights, who are both based in Eastern Africa and who between them have many years of experience of working on digital and data transformation as well as agriculture. Having authored the study that we will dive deeper into just now, they will also be the ones guiding us through this session. So the presentation of the study's results will be followed by a fireside chat. And for that fireside chat, I would like to also welcome Fotini Zampati, a legal data expert and has been focusing on open data and data protection for many years, also with a focus on agriculture. She has inter alia worked for the Global Open Data and Agriculture Initiative, and we're very happy to have her with us today. And last but not least, allow me to introduce to you Dr. Simone Sella, who has more than 15 years experience working on digital solutions for sustainable development, and who of last year is the Director of Global Soil and Ecosystem Solutions of Vardo Field Data Exchange, a Yara corporate startup facilitating the sharing of data. And with that, I would like to hand over to you, Christophe, for the interactive Mentee survey and also the presentation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Joanna, and also Elke for opening. And very good to virtually meet you all. I see some faces that I've had the chance to meet in person, so it's really good to see you here. My name is Christophe. I'm an associate partner at Dalberg. I'm co-leading our digital and data agriculture practice, and I'm based out of Nairobi. And as Joanna presented before, I will be driving this discussion with my colleague Joanne, who is a senior consultant with us in East Africa, but based in Kampala. And what we thought we could maybe do to properly kick us off is to do a quick warm-up with a Mentee poll. So I believe some of you have already used Mentee before. It should be a very intuitive platform for us to exchange some quick ideas. I believe you will also receive the link to the Mentee in the chat, so you can just click on that URL. Another option is to scan the QR code that you have on this slide. And then if these two things don't work, you have a third option, which is to go on mentee.com and enter the code that is here, 1410 36 23. So I'll just stay here for a couple of more seconds to let people scan the code or click on the link that is in the chat. But I guess that everyone should be able to do it. If you have any issues, feel free to also raise them in the chat, and then the facilitator of the session will also help you to go there. But let me transition to the Mentee, and here you can still see the basically the way to go to the poll. So to go to mentee.com and use this code, but you can also just click in the link on the link, sorry, that is in the chat. But I see that we already have a couple of people joining the Mentee and sharing some perspective. You can also share multiple answers or perspective to this first question that we have for you, which is basically helping us to get a sense of what you would like to get during the session that we will be driving together today. And I will basically pick maybe some points here that I feel are especially resonating well with what we will be discussing today. People interested in the type of data which matter for smallholder farmers. So we will talk a bit about that for sure. The misuse and misuse of data, I think that's something very well aligned with this topic, and we will show that data sovereignty is actually in a way a mean to that end, to have a better use of the data, better respecting basically the rights of the different stakeholders active along the value chain, especially in low and middle income countries, which was the geographical focus of this study. How will data be handled in 20 years from now? That's an interesting question. And I believe that what we will discuss today is very, very forward-looking. It's very nascent. So in a way, we are trying to give a perspective into some good practices that we believe will be becoming more and more the norm in the future. So quite interesting to indeed maybe project ourselves in a couple of years from now. We'll definitely talk about innovations. We'll talk about impact as well. I see that some people want to get some really practical solutions and some sort of how-to guides. We'll keep that in mind and try to provide a couple of perspectives on this. It's partly part of what we had in mind today. Here I see someone who would like us to maybe compare sovereignty and the free flow of information. This is also something that we will touch upon for sure. And then people also I see here interested to get a sense of how maybe the private data holders could make their data more available. And I would add on this more available with respect to the rights and doing it ethically and in a fair way. So that's clearly part of what we will be thinking of today. How to develop the trust in data sharing, very, very critical as well. I see that there are probably a couple of people who can still join. I will move to the next question, but that's already a very, very good insights into what you want to get from this session. And in a way, the good news is that I guess that what we had in mind to present you today is covering most of this. And then you will see that this session will actually, most of it will be a discussion with Simone and Foteini, but then also a fairly long Q&A session. So if there are things that you feel haven't been discussed and addressed, I do believe that we will have enough time to tackle them after the presentation that we kept quite short, because we want to make this more of a conversation. I will move to the next question, but I still invite people to join the Mentee. So the link remains the same. It's available in the chat for those who've just joined the discussion. We are really, really looking forward to get your perspectives and your ideas into this question. So you can just go on Mentee.com and enter the code that is here on top of the screen. Alternatively, you can click on the link in the chat. And the second question that that we have for you is, what do you think when you think of data sovereignty? So again, feel free to share multiple perspectives, multiple ideas, but very curious to see a bit what people think of data sovereignty at this stage, and hopefully, of course, you will have like a lot more ideas when it comes to answering this question after the session. At the moment, we only have, here we go, a couple of other perspectives coming in. Something that only the EU seems to care about. That's a bit harsh, but it's true that the EU, especially the Commission, has been quite of a thought leader with the GDPR, but also with the Data Governance Act over the last years. But we can share a couple of words into actually the current status, which goes much beyond the European Union. Talking about the countries where Joanne and myself are based out, Uganda and Kenya, both countries have actually drafted a new data protection / data privacy act in the last 3 years, as in a way a follow-up of this movement that was initiated by the Commission, the European Commission. Other people, when they think of data sovereignty, they think of a complicated concept. That's good. So it makes even more sense for this discussion to happen. Data restriction, for sure, part of it. Data quality and user monetization. That's interesting. And indeed, probably data sovereignty is a way to foster monetization of the data and support data quality. As well. Certainly a game changer. That's a great news. So we have quite some enthusiasm around the topic. I will pick maybe a couple of more. Data rights coming up again, which is good, very much indeed aligned with the way we describe data sovereignty. Data governance, for sure. That's part of it. I would even say that kind of data sovereignty is maybe a sub aspect or subtopic of data governance, or finding ways to better govern the data. Individual control and agency. That's very, very much spot on. And I will maybe move to the next question on this one, because this one is probably the one that is best representing what we also envision for data sovereignty. A bit of a provocative question here, which is why should we care about data sovereignty? Is it something that you believe is maybe overcomplicating things? Is it actually worth it investing in this concept of data sovereignty? And I think the ideas of control and agency over the data that that this participant shared before is very much representing what we have in mind here. But do we actually think that we should care about that? Or is it something that is just interesting maybe for the intellectual concept? So a bit of a provocative question, but quite keen to get your, again, perspective on this one. And that will be the last question that we will have before jumping in straight into the content. We should care to the extent farmers care about it. That's interesting. So it's indeed at the end of the day, making it very kind of user-centered or human-centered in a way. I'm very much aligned with this, and I see that there are still people joining. We are about 80 in the session now. That's exciting to see. Please feel free to quickly go to Mentee and share your perspectives on some of the questions that we are using to warm us up. So we should care about data sovereignty, apparently, according to people here, to avoid the misuse of big data, to create trust. So that's for sure as well. And then I also see here someone saying that because it deals with matters such as data governance and rights. And so again, that's probably echoing what we were discussing before. We should care about data sovereignty because data is the future. Maybe in some geographies it's even the present, but agree that will probably become even more critical in the future. Preventing data concentration and asymmetries, that's very interesting, and it's clearly a good reason to care about sovereignty. I will maybe pick a last one, and then we'll go to the really core of the session. Maybe this one a bit longer because individuals should have a right to control and determine how their data is used, as well as a share in its commercialization. And yeah, indeed. And so again, we can see that we have like a lot of these ideas and perspectives that are revolving around these concepts of control and agency of the people over their data. And it's really great to hear, because you will see that that concept of control is actually what we put at the core of the definition of data sovereignty that we came up with, and that Joanne will present in a bit. Thanks for all the participants who chipped in these three questions. And with this, I guess that we can go back to the presentation. I hope all of you can see my screen. But as you can see, we are now on the second point of this agenda, where we will start by giving you a bit of a context into this study and the way we came up with the insights that we will present only in 25 minutes. And then you can see that actually the main part of this session will be the chat with Foteini and Simone, as well as the discussion that we will have all together in the session, where we will really open the floor and try to make it as interactive as possible. In a way, I think that we invite anyone to share as we go, but then again, we will probably wait a couple of more minutes before really opening, but feel free to share the questions already in the chat so that we can already kind of wrap our heads around them and try to come up with the best answers to these questions. Starting with the context of this study, and Elke already provided a bit of it, but here what we wanted to do is maybe to unpack it a bit further, and maybe a couple of important messages here. I think the first one is, as I was saying before, we are talking about data sovereignty, of course, in agricultural value chains, but here we are also giving a bit more of a focus on low and middle income countries as a geography. So it's very large, but then what we mean by that is also geographies where the importance of smallholder farming is especially critical, basically. And so that's kind of a key persona, if I can call it this way, that is at the core of our reflection here. So that's one thing that is important. Then a second thing that is important is that this study has been building on three, let's say, key pillars. We've been conducting about 20 expert interviews. You can see a list of them here, and some of you are present in the conversation, as I've seen. So it's really good to see you. Thank you again for having contributed to that study. And there was, of course, like a lot of very, very interesting conversations that we've had together. And this is what we will be presenting today, is actually thank to you who participated in these interviews. We had people from multilaterals, we had people from the civil society, we had people that are more coming from the kind of D4Ag or digital agriculture vendors side. We had like organizations that are more catalyzing the overall ecosystem. So really trying to get ideas from different perspectives and different angles of the ecosystem. Another pillar was, of course, the desk review. There has been already a bit of research in that topic. Honestly, not too much, especially when we look at the intersection between that geography, agricultural value chains with data sovereignty. And then we also benefited from a personal experience from Dalberg as a firm who, as you might know, is a global consultancy combining data science, strategy, design thinking, primary research, and a lot of other capabilities across the globe. So we benefited from that network and that knowledge, but also the knowledge from GIZ, the Innovation for Agriculture Fund, and some of their direct colleagues as well from GIZ. And then, of course, third and important message here is that we've had like different outputs from this study. At this stage, it's still not made public, but we are working on it. And we believe that in the coming months, you will be able to access a more extended version than what you will see today in this session. But we've looked at the agricultural data as a whole, the concept of data sovereignty, risks and opportunities, some concrete paths to data sovereignty. I remember someone in the Mentee requesting to look at this. I don't think we'll be able to fully unpack that here, but hopefully in the result of the public version of this study, you will have more information into that. Different models of data sovereignty, as well as basically some case studies. 3 case studies even that are present in the study. And then we've also drafted some recommendations that we will spend some time on today to basically keep an eye a bit on the future and being a bit forward-looking. Before handing over the floor to Joan, I just wanted to say that this is the output of a quite short study. It was about 7 weeks of work. And so this has no pretension to answer all the questions that are related to data sovereignty. And so we are very, very much curious to hear what you think, how you feel about what we've done here, and what you believe we should do more in the future. And with this, I will propose to actually hand over the floor to Joan, who will basically give us a bit of a perspective into these different components of the study. Over to you, Joan.
Thanks, Chris, for that overview and early introduction, and a good morning or afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be presenting our findings on this really interesting topic, and great to also have worked closely with the GIZ ICTforAg team over those 7 or 8 weeks that we're developing this study. So starting with, in thinking about how to build a path towards data sovereignty for smallholder farmers in low and middle income countries, we thought it would be good to first lay some groundwork by understanding the data types and data flows within ag value chains. So how is data generated? How is it handled? and ultimately how is it used. So we see that farmer and farm data is typically generated by farmers themselves, but also by extension officers or agents who support them through the use of digital systems, whether that's e-advisory services or logs. And then finally through remote or on-farm sensors, which transmit information about the farm. And the medium used is typically a mobile phone that allows a wide range of data points to be collected. So across the 4 categories, we wanted to understand their characteristics in terms of the level of identifiability, which we were defining sort of as a capacity to identify the farmer through the personal data that is being collected. And when you hear us use the word personal data in the context of this study, we're defining it as data that relates to an individual who can either directly or indirectly be identified from that data, whether that's a name or an identification number, their location data, or so on. So level of identifiability, level of control, which we will look at more closely under the framework later, and also marketability or tradability. So in some of our past work, we've seen that data that's collected by agents can be highly identifiable and more marketable compared to other means of collecting data, since they're more often acting in an intermediary fashion on behalf of larger commercial impact interests. And if we move on to the next slide, we'll also see that there's the practical uses of these data categories also vary, but ultimately we can group them into 3 main buckets. The first bucket is internal data uses. So this is where data is not shared externally, fairly straightforward, with an example being a customer relationship management data, like what is collected in a private farmer registry. The second bucket would be byproduct uses, where that data is shared along some kind of transaction that can be a commercial or non-commercial transaction. So a transaction of a product or service, but is not at the core of it. And then the last one would be data transactions, where the data is valued at the core of the transaction. So the difference between the first two, the first instant, where data is shared along the transaction, data is merely a byproduct. It's neither the primary goal nor is it directly monetized. For example, where an aggregator sells agricultural produce to an off-taker, and the produce is the primary commodity, but along with that, maybe they're provided with some farmer data that's related to it. In the second instance, where the data is at the core of the transaction, the data is intentionally collected, processed, and shared between 2 or more organizations, whether that's for commercial or non-commercial purposes. So that an example of that can be where, for example, a Ministry of Agriculture shares farmer statistics with other public, private, or development actors, or even as in the example earlier, where an off-taker obtains farmer data, not just as an accessory to a commodity that they're purchasing, but makes a specific request for that data and pays a premium for it, maybe as part of their ESG traceability, environment, social, and governance objectives. And when we look at the role that smallholder farmers play in the management of agriculture data, we see that typically they have the least amount of agency or control, which someone mentioned as how they understand data sovereignty. And this is despite farmers being the primary producers of this data. So that means that they continue to be excluded in different ways from the inherent financial or non-financial value of that data. So empowering farmers to have more control or sovereignty over the data ultimately contributes to the improvement and protection of their livelihoods. But doing so is dependent on there being a few enabling factors in place in the ecosystem, because if data is digital information, then there are definitely a number of digital technological gaps to contend with in the context of smallholder farmers, especially in low and middle income countries, in addition to other factors like the digital literacy and even awareness of this data. So in understanding all that underpins data sovereignty, we developed a simple framework which we can actually look at on the next slide. So we define data sovereignty as the capability of an individual or, sorry, the previous slide. Thank you. We define data sovereignty as the capability of an individual or an organization to have control over their personal and business data. So control is really at the core of this concept. We feel that that term and concept encapsulates a lot of even what was shared earlier when we were talking about how we think about data sovereignty. And within the scope of this study, when we talk about control over data, we're distinguishing 4 specific activities that a user could undertake in exercising that control. So those are the handling of that data. So that can include actions like the collection, processing, and sharing of the data. It can include the consenting or provision of consent for the handling of that data. Thirdly, the monitoring of the data. So, for example, data tracing, seeing who is accessing the data and at what time for what purpose. And then lastly, the withdrawing of it, so including removal of access or deletion of the data itself. And this concept of control is underpinned or is made possible by a set of enabling factors like I mentioned earlier. And we bucket these at the individual and ecosystem levels. At the individual level, so the level of the farmer themselves, thinking of key enablers like awareness, access, and literacy, while at the ecosystem level, sort of cutting across those individual enablers, factors like regulation, the digital environment, and then the business ecosystem. So looking briefly at what each of these means, when we think of awareness, we're really referring to one's knowledge of the existence of the data and also their basic rights regarding it. It's difficult to objectively measure farmers' awareness of the existence and the use of their data, but we did use proxies or metrics like awareness of mobile internet capabilities, and also asked our interview experts to rank these enablers, which we'll review in a bit. Then access, on the other hand, refers to being able to retrieve and examine the data, as well as access to the tools and technology itself that allows one to control the data. And then literacy, we define as an understanding of the data itself, so of the data's nature, its value, also an understanding of, again, of the tools and technology. And then more broadly, the ecosystem enablers that cut across, they may not necessarily be conditional for the control of data, but we do see them as contributing greatly. When we look at digital enablers, if we can start with that, and think about control over data, we know that to control data, one has to interact with some kind of digital infrastructure or tools because it is digital information. So we're thinking of enablers like any technology that supports access. For example, digital identification, digital ID that someone might need to access a repository of data. We can also think of any digital payments mechanism that can enable data sharing or monetization, internet connectivity that allows one to connect to be online. And we've seen that this enabler is lower in low and middle income countries where farmers still operate largely off-grid, smallholder farmers specifically. And looking at the business ecosystem or the commercial environment, here we're looking sort of at the business realities on the ground of that local service providers have to contend with. For example, if we're thinking of access to data, which is that individual enabler, especially remote access, then that is only made possible through data management innovations like digital registries, mobile or USSD applications. Or at the broader level, we can even think of, or at the market level, we can even think of other market forces or drivers of business and startup ventures like business incubation, venture financing, human capital, and so on, which in many of the countries that we're looking at, we're still seeing some fledgling level of investment into agtech solutions. And also data sovereignty remains very much that an emerging concept in the business ecosystem. And then lastly, with the regulatory environment, we do have to consider the legal and policy frameworks under which data use and control is governed, since by its very nature it's jurisdictional, and so ultimately you're going to have different implications for data sovereignty in different countries. Like someone mentioned earlier, something that only the EU cares about right now. So definitely in areas where there isn't a strong regulation like the GDPR, then that has implications for this topic. And regulation is also the avenue, through which we can start discussing the issues of rights and ownership. How do we understand the legal property rights around data? And similar questions. So as part of our interviews, we did ask most of our experts to give a qualitative ranking of the individual enablers, so awareness, access, and literacy for smallholder farmers on a 4-point scale. So for example, did they think farmers' access to data was non-existent, low, medium, or high? And on average, all 3 enablers were ranked as low, with access being slightly lower, and with awareness slightly higher. And these were more or less supported by our desk research, which looked at these key drivers, alongside other data points like access to mobile technology, handset affordability, and so on. So just wanted to spend a bit of time over that framework, as it was a really key component of our study. But as we move into now sort of with that understanding of the data sovereignty and the role it plays, we can walk through more of our analysis on the market risks and opportunities and the pathways and models to data sovereignty. So, we've seen that overall data sovereignty of farmers can be considered low, and this comes with certain risks or opportunity costs. So for example, when we think of fairness, we see that the lack of a farmer's control over their data can contribute to unfair and unsustainable redistribution of benefits or wealth along the value chain. For example, if you have an instance where a farmer is not getting paid a share of the premium that a consumer pays for a crop or product that is more sustainably grown. When we think of design, we can see that this means farmers are lacking control over farmers' lack of control over their data leads to more limited data availability and accessibility to sort of drive the improvement to improve the design of rural products and services. Whether that means that, for example, if there's an agriculture insurance product, it might mean that that's not adequately adapted to the needs of farmers, especially female farmers, because of poor product design or some kind of biased design. When we think of competition, we're seeing here farmers' choices being limited to existing products and services. For example, a farmer community might be stuck with one input provider owning their production data history, and that might limit the opportunities they're exposed to. And also discrimination in terms of, we already talked about personal data. Can this potentially lead to personally identifiable information that is misused in some way, maybe with a farmer not being able to access a particular financial product based on whatever personal information is identifiable. So how can data sovereignty, with these risks and sort of missed opportunity costs, how can it be built into agricultural value chains? Well, we grouped the types of interventions into 3 buckets: indirect, intermediary, and direct. And maybe briefly, when we talk about indirect interventions, here we're thinking of how can we strengthen the enabling environment and the capacity of farmers. And so, referencing our data sovereignty framework, such interventions can be interventions to increase awareness of farmers, whether that's through awareness campaigns deployed through networks of extension officers. It can be to enable stronger access to the tools and technology that farmers would need, farmers and associations would need to exercise control over data. For example, maybe programs on digitization of farmer associations, more mature business ecosystem, facilitating the ease of doing business, and especially engaging stakeholders who are part of the broader digital ecosystem, and so on. And in our full study, we did include case studies for each of these interventions. So for the indirect intervention, we profiled the Indian Digital Ecosystem for Agriculture, or IDEA framework, also known as AgriStack, which is a top-down framework that was developed by the Indian Ministry of Agriculture, which was aimed to create this comprehensive digital environment, and that would allow a wide range of agro stakeholders to have access to key agriculture data sets, whether that was weather forecasts, land reports, commodity pricing, and so on. And then when we think about intermediary interventions, these are, we're talking about how can we establish a foundational layer of a data sovereignty platform in the public sector. So they're more direct, but still require some investment from the public sector to build that foundational platform or that data ecosystem. And these typically take place in a context where there's already been some penetration of digital ag solutions like e-advisory services, but not to a great extent. And the advancement is very much a top-down effort driven primarily by the public sector, where, for example, some kind of public sector-led consortium drives the effort from mapping the agriculture data ecosystem to understand what's the demand for data, what's the supply, what are the potential use cases, assesses the risks and opportunities for that, and then also drives the building of the ag data infrastructure, the software and hardware, the governance layers, and even the business model. And slowly along the way, pulling in the relevant stakeholders, looping in the technical intermediaries from the private sector, looping in farmer and farmer associations to build that awareness, trust, and capacity among them. And then, also catalyzing in any, like I said, use cases of that data infrastructure. And here the case study that we used was a project being driven by a private sector actor called Digital Green. The project is called Digital Agriculture Advisory Services, or DAAS, in partnership with the government of Ethiopia. And Digital Green developed and is continuing to develop a software called FarmStack, which is an open source protocol that allows secure and trusted data transfers between different agro-ecosystem actors, and allows for consent to be shared by farmers for the use of that data. And then finally, direct interventions. This is where we're thinking of how to enable usability and sharing of data with the private sector. This is now taking place here the context is that there's a more mature level of digitization within ag value chains. There isn't the need to build a foundational layer of data sovereignty. Farmers already have the accesses that they would need to digital advisory, data-driven financial access, and so on, and might even be digitally connected to other markets. And the case study that we did for such an intervention is the International Dairy Data Exchange Network, or EDEN, which is the largest international dairy data partnership that is streamlining data exchange services and integration between dairy equipment and national dairy information systems to create a single data interface for the chain of stakeholders, manufacturers, milk collecting organizations, farm service providers, and so on, all while ensuring that dairy farmers are retaining control over their data. So very interesting case study to look at. So, with all of this in mind, I think that the key question now is that we asked ourselves is, how can data sovereignty actually be operationalized? These are the three buckets we just went over fairly high level, and we wanted to understand specific models of operationalization, models of especially models that are sustainable and scalable. So we developed 4 data sovereignty models. If we could move on to the next slide, 4 data sovereignty models that are sort of anchored around the concepts of a data cooperative. And this is borrowing from a framework that was developed by Alex Pentland, a professor at MIT. So we can think of a data cooperative as a farmer cooperative with a data control mandate, and with a personal data store, which in this context is like a digital technology that enables farmers or farmer associations or cooperatives to exercise that control over their data. And when we look at the data cooperative ecosystem in the graphic being shown, we see that the personal data store is plugged into different systems that generate, store, and process the personal data of farmers. So let's take a look at the 4 models. If we move on to the next slide, the first model, we start with a simpler, more basic model, which we call the data sovereignty silo, where a data cooperative has and owns a personal data store and exercises control over it. So for example, if sharing that data with an agribusiness or with a service provider that is engaging with the cooperative in that way, that would be a very sort of direct exchange and exercise of control over their data. The second model is one that we call the one-to-one data sharing, that takes the basic concept of the data silo, but builds onto it in such a way that the data shared between the data cooperative and the provider can be shared with another agri-service provider or agribusiness, so as to maybe tap into some kind of new service opportunity for the farmers or the larger cooperative. And this is useful, especially where there are interdependencies in the data that's needed and that's used by different service providers. So for example, if an agribusiness can provide a farmer's location data with a precision ag company that then uses that data to give more timely insights on changing weather patterns or crop disease risks to the farmers, or something similar. And the third model, still building on to this course, the third model is the data ecosystem. And this involves a one-to-many data exchange in comparison to the previous one, which was a one-to-one. Again, the core concept is similar with the personal data store, except we're now seeing the farmer or cooperative being engaged with providers, 1 to N, so up to several organizations. And this model more pertains to a situation where you can meet saying my internet connection is unstable. This model particular interest among organizations to share farmer data throughout the ecosystem, maybe given more complex data needs, or maybe for the continuous improvement of the delivery of agri-services to farmers. So an example could be where you have a farmer that's tapped into a few different technologies that can inform each other, maybe like a productive use of energy technology. So you have a solar irrigation system that the farmer uses that is based on weather that is coming from with a creditor to maybe they're also connected to a market links platform to have better access to inputs and off-takers. And then finally, the fourth and last model is what we call the data marketplace. And we can think of it as many-to-many data exchange. So we had one-to-one, one-to-many, and now many-to-many. So we still have the personal data store, but you notice here, we consider the data cooperative, given in other words, we're not looking at the individual farm in this particular model and look at only the data cooperative, because here we're considering the marginal value of an individual farmer's data is likely to be 0 or close to 0. And here the incentive or the benefit of sharing and accessing this data and exercising control of it shifts from purely service-based to now even potentially direct monetary benefit or some kind of other measurable value from the data exchange. So across the 4 models, if we move on to the next slide, we can see that there's a progression in terms of the benefit to the farmer from the first data silo, where the farmer has the highest level of control over their data, but fairly limited service and income options, and then going through the other models where the service quality and the range of services available continuously increases. And represented on this 2x2 matrix actually contrast the data flows and the value generated across the 4 models, where the y-axis looks at the data exchange, so either to an individual or to to an individual, to a business ultimately, and the x-axis represents the key value that is created. So that sort of summarizes our analysis, encapsulating, looking at the market, looking at the risks and opportunities, looking at, and then in more detail, the data portions of analysis. But we thought these were the critical findings that would be of interest. I'll hand over to Chris now to take us through some of the specific recommendations based on analysis that we made to GIZ, and then moving on to the fireside chat.
Thank you very much, Joanne, and sorry for the little green scribbles that were on the screen before. We had to problem solve on the fly, but we made them disappearing thanks to a good team effort. But yeah, thanks again, Joanne, for walking us through all these elements of coming from our study. And we just wanted, before opening the floor, going in the discussion with Simone and Foteini, maybe just show you a sense of humility, because we've presented a lot of concept, and I hope that this was digestible and not too overwhelming, because we also appreciate that these were a lot of probably new concepts for some of you. But we also want to basically be transparent in a way that these concepts remain quite theoretical, and that there are many things that still need to be answered. And as a team, and I believe as a group, we are excited to try to answer some of the open questions that we still have. Here we structured them in 5 different buckets. They are definitely not exhaustive, so we have many others, but we have questions when it comes to the types of business models for these, let's say, approaches to data sovereignty. We also would be keen to better understand the kind of governance, for example, think of roles and responsibilities that are required to implement and put these data sovereignty model into actions. We've already seen a couple of elements, and we have a couple of elements of answers to that question coming from our case studies, but we know that this is not enough, and that we need to keep, let's say, feed that reflection. In terms of technology, we touched a bit upon it with this concept of personal data store, data cooperatives. There are different ways to call them. Sometimes some people talk about data wallet, and today there is more and more with the expansion of Web3 technologies. There are definitely a lot of new things that can be used in this concept. We know that we also need to better understand the enabling environment, how to better map and assess it, understanding in what context, using what model, for example. So having some quick ways to understand how to approach this, which is a very good segue to the 5th category of questions that we have still, and that we hope that we will be able to team up with some of you to try to answer them in the coming months and years around the implementation. So really to try to understand the different archetype when it comes to the implementation of the data sovereignty models. What are the key steps and activities that are required to build data sovereignty, but also to build it at scale, and make it sustainable and scalable. So that's just very quickly how we wanted to wrap this up in a way, and show you that there are still many things that we want to work on and that we want to answer. And maybe we will get already some answers from Simone and Foteini, who are here with us today. And one of the things that we wanted to do now before opening for a broader Q&A, and I've seen that there are a lot of questions already popping up in the chat. I wish I could answer to that independently, but maybe we will take some of them as we go in the session. But again, just wanted to thank you, Simone and Foteini, for joining us. And if that makes sense to all of you, I maybe would be keen to invite Foteini and then Simone to introduce yourself and maybe give us a perspective, a quick perspective into the way you are personally, Foteini, related to data sovereignty. Yeah, basically who you are, what you are doing, and how does that articulate with some of the concepts that we've been unpacking in this session so far.
Yes, thank you, Christophe, and thank you everyone for the invitation to this very interesting discussion, I would say. Well, I am a data protection advisor working at currently at the Chapman Framework Air Marketing, where I am actually reviewing, updating, developing data protection policies within the company, and in relation how we could be more compliant to the national and international legislation such as the GDPR. So my work links 100% with data sovereignty because it has exactly to do with the capability of having control of the personal data and business data within the organization. This is what I'm doing. I'm also doing research and analysis of national and international legislation around privacy and data protection. Also I'm looking on codes of conduct, and previously, to link it with our today's discussion, I was working as a data rights specialist at the Global Open Data for Agriculture and Nutrition Initiative. And I was responsible for the open data policies, farmers' data rights, data governance, what are the risks of data misuse, seeing the digital divide. So this discussion is very relevant to what I've been doing, and very recently I contributed to the development of the data governance framework within the Ministry of Agriculture in Kenya for farmers registration. We could further elaborate on that, how it aligns with data sovereignty. So that's it from my part, what I've been doing and I am doing. Again, I'm very happy to be here and try to answer all the questions that might pop up. I've already seen very interesting questions, very targeted questions that we will be happy to discuss with you and the participants as well. Thank
you, Foteini. And indeed, when I believe we connected during the study itself, you were still at Godan, but transitioned to another organization which seems still very much related to this. So it's great to have you on board. And maybe just asking the same question to Simone, who you are, what you're doing, and how you relate to data sovereignty. Over to you, Simone.
Yeah, hi to everybody connected here today. So my name is Simone Sala. I'm a computer scientist who fell in love with agriculture a few years ago in 2004. I remember when I did my first project in rural Ghana. And since then, I would say I've been trying to answer the question of how can I use technology, digital technology with farmers to support agricultural development. And I did a PhD in agricultural sciences because I realized that I needed to learn to speak the language of farmers, the language of agronomists, of agricultural experts to really co-design solutions together. Otherwise, I would have been perceived as someone who was trying to sell some nice gadgets, rather than someone interested in transforming agriculture and for good, you know. So as part of my work, I've been collaborating with different multilateral organizations, with academic institutes, research groups. Lately, you know, let's say I joined an initiative called VARDA, launched by Yara. It's a corporate startup from Yara. And I really focused on the possibility that as part of all this work, I focused on the possibility that smallholder farmers could have not only adopted technology, but appropriate the technology. And data clearly became one prominent element as the time passed by. The initiative, let's say, as part of the initiatives I did in the past, I started pitching and the possibility of creating an independent data hub to some farmer organizations. Last year, I joined VARDA, which is exactly focused on creating a trusted data as a service platform whereby farmers and those working with them can safely store and exchange data with those who provide meaningful products and services to them. And clearly, as part of this roadmap, as part of this story, data sovereignty is clearly very relevant because as part of my job, we want each data flowing through our platform to respect the laws, the regulations of the specific geography where the data is collected and processed. And we also want to go beyond because we want the users to be able to define their own policies, even when they are transnational communities to some extent. So, for example, international farm organizations, cooperatives, etc. So, again, data sovereignty and in general, the concept of sovereignty has been a thread I've been following for my whole career and lately applied to data and is and will be particularly relevant as I move forward, I guess. So, over to you again, Christoph.
Thank you, Simone. And interesting to see that with this project at VARDA, you are probably a bit closer to really implementation of some of these elements of data sovereignty models, while maybe Fonteni has been working more on the foundational layer and some of the legal and ethical frameworks that are supporting these reflections. So it's really good to have both of you in this discussion. Maybe now, giving back the floor to Fonteni, I would be curious to hear from you if the models that we presented, the frameworks which we understand conceptual, and hopefully will become more closer to operation and implementation in the future, but would be keen to hear from you if they resonate with you. What are your first reactions when you see some of the outputs of this study?
Yes. Christoph, indeed, when I read your study, I realized that you captured all the basic key points around data sovereignty, and as much as it concerns more the legal frameworks, I will speak more from that perspective. Yes, it is essential that more legal frameworks need to be developed, regulation and around data privacy, specifically in low-income countries. In developed countries, there are already in place legislation around privacy, but not again in low-income countries. The good and optimistic thing is that more and more countries such as Uganda, Kenya, they have developed very, very recently data protection legislation. It is based, heavily based, I would say, on the GDPR. but it's a very good first approach. Also, independent authorities have been developed for exactly regulating these issues around personal data. So it will definitely apply to farmers as well. Even though I need to mention that with farmers' data and farm data, it's not so clear to define which types of data is personal and which types is not personal data. There is an issue here. You have also addressed that. Also, it is important for being able to control personal data, to have access to data. It is important to develop policies, develop procedures and processes, codes of conduct, besides, the regulation that they will help, I would say, different stakeholders in the data value chain to engage more in data sharing and understanding more from the farmer's perspective, the value of benefit sharing, because up until now, we do all know that, digital technologies in agriculture have a lot to offer. That's true. They can increase the profitability, productivity, farmers' income. But from the other side, from the farmer's perspective, in many cases, farmers, they don't really get the benefit of these services. In many cases, they are not aware of it. In many cases, they are not able to have access to these digital technologies due to the lack, of internet connectivity. There is the literacy issue, so many challenges to be addressed. But I think that these challenges can be dealt exactly by raising awareness, by also highlighting what are the best practices already in place, what are best business models in, let's say, low-income countries, and try to get a paradigm and adjust it to the needs of another country, I would say. I've also noticed, and I was very, very intrigued by that, by an application, DigiMe, that you mentioned in your study, and it has to do with consent and how farmers can give their consent, and actually they can see who has access to their data, when, for which purpose, that no transfer to third parties is allowed after that. So there are good examples to follow in order to have data sovereignty, and of course, also to develop data governance as well, since frameworks, since we are talking about policies, processes in place around data security, standards and protocols. These are the most important topics I would focus on and highlight on in relation to data sovereignty and control of personal data in general, from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Foteni. And indeed, I think that the question that you raised around how to actually bridge the gap between these concepts and the farmers themselves, especially when we are looking at geographies where, as Joan was presenting before, some of the key pillars of the sovereignty are not always all strong for each farmer. So when it comes to the literacy, the data and digital literacy, the access to the technologies, but also the awareness to their rights and the concepts behind this is very often, at least today, preventing a large scale expansion of these concepts. And that's maybe a good way to give back the floor to Simone. And one question, in a way, if I can kind of summarize a bit some of what we've discussed now, is what are some of your ideas, perspectives, or maybe also some open questions that you still have around how to go beyond pilot projects when it comes to data sovereignty, and how you can bring, again, these frameworks and this model into implementation successfully? I think it's a very hard nut to crack, if I may say, but maybe as you are, and you've been working, especially now at Varda, very closely to these questions around and closer to the implementation itself, would be good to get your perspectives and some of your ideas when it comes to bringing this to life, basically.
Yeah, no, thank you. And rightfully, as you said, I think we are really at the beginning of a new era, no? So my reflections that very much complement what Foteini was just saying in terms of which are the barriers and the issues that prevent those initiatives to scale up are assumptions to some extent, assumptions that I've been testing, that I'm testing, and say first thing that we will need is really collaboration when I think about how to go beyond the pilots, because there are clearly competition, not only in the private sector, also in the public sector, among who is trying to launch the best initiative or the best project when it comes to data-driven services in the ag world and pretty much every sector. And I think that collaboration is key to really try to answer these questions together, as we are trying to do today. And again, when I think about what can be the enablers, it's easier to start with the barriers, and some of those have been mentioned already and summarized very well by Foteini. And I think that clearly trust, capacity are key. Setting a plain level field. Technical barriers are also important because, you know, apart from having access to having data, having technology able to generate data, then you have fragmentation of data sets, which is technically speaking, it's quite particularly difficult to be able to access to fragmented data sources, as it is the case in agriculture. Not to mention the fact that from, let's say, moving from raw data to, you know, data-driven services that needs intensive cleansing and sweating on data that's not necessarily technically and financially easy to do. And the fact that, you know, Foteini was referring to formats, to standardization. Data sources are rarely structured except for a few geographies and data sources. So, you know, finding common ways to format the data, exchange those data sets is technically challenging, other than being a financial barrier. Then you have limited incentives. Then we are all in for making agriculture greener, but who is going to pay for that? And clearly that's an issue. And it cannot be farmers, because they bear already all the cost of adopting new practices, testing new technologies, bearing all the risks of changing any practice they change, you know, because they are ultimately the one who respond, one in the front line of responding to changes. Trust barriers, you know, legitimate fear that data will be used for unintended uses, bad consequences, scare of losing control of data, scare of unassociated use of disclosure of data. And again, capacity barriers when it comes to being actually able, having the agency to do something with data, not being discriminated in access to the data, etc. So those are all different elements that create barriers to the scale up of initiatives. And when I think about what could be the enablers, I think mainly at 4 enablers. Let's say first is coordination, because again, we need coordination among actors. This is particularly a role that the public can play, because we can create as many working groups as we want, but if each actor then investing in the data ecosystem comes with their new working group, their new standard, we won't go very far. And therefore identifying a focal point at the national level, regional level, that can have the mandate to coordinate on sectoral data-driven policies, you know, is key. And maybe anchoring that to an office that is less sensitive to political changes is particularly helpful. And this clearly will organize workshops, conference, working groups, convene third parties, and develop roadmaps together. The second enabler is the setting up of a level playing field, you know, creating the core infrastructure, as Foteini was saying, to be able that anybody is willing to participate, and the rules to establish and scale up data sovereignty initiatives. So on one hand, you have the need to assess infrastructures, capacities, the needs, the gaps, the assets, so as to invest in creating the basis for everyone to participate, to truly participate, or to not participate, because that is also a legitimate, position. That's a legitimate approach, not to participate. And having the active coordination I was referring before is important, because when you define gaps, when you define assets, when you define opportunities, among the different actors, then you just need to inform an agenda and priority setting for everyone willing to effectively contribute. And if you start with that from scratch every time, it becomes very difficult. On the other hand, clearly you have the definition of clear rules and policies to avoid initiatives to move into a vacuum, which typically create imbalances and unfair advantages to some or some over the other, So creating a policy for data protection and exchange is important. Define rules for the use and reuse of public data, crowdsourcing data, private data is key. Set what companies can share, what can use, and what could be built on existing types of information is to create incremental value is important. The third is interoperability, the third point, which is essential. We need and have to create working groups and award those players that participate in those working groups and build on the shared meta formats, existing meta formats, standards, taxonomies, ontology that support cross-device use cases. That's very important, because otherwise the risk is always to start again with a new standard. So promoting that is key. And finally, incentives, because as I was saying before, we can create as many working groups as we want, but if there is no way to mobilize resources to create the playing level field, to have the user safely participate, it will be difficult for data sovereignty initiatives to scale up. That's something that both the public and the private can do. And when I think about activities that could facilitate the creation of such an integrated ecosystem, I think not only allowing but also promoting the use and reuse of public data, because that creates a very useful critical mass, and setting up public data hubs whereby private actors that participate, that use and build on those data and create or adopt pipelines to those data are incentivized, are awarded to some extent. Creating incentives for data suppliers and raising awareness and transparent incentives. So clearly well-articulated and clear incentives for data suppliers, and raise awareness for, as Foteini was saying before, to make data owners know that there is this possibility, create safe spaces for them to experiment and allow the portability of data among these different pilots, because this way you create synergies and among those initiatives, and you allow the scaling up. And one last point is also the incentivizing the creating incentives for higher, let's say, to level up the quality of data and data services, because otherwise we run into the problem of farmers receiving services or say the surrounding ecosystem receiving services that are not relevant, and therefore who feel that the sovereignty is not relevant either, which is not the case. And therefore, I'm always thinking about one idea of mine is to allow private providers to be listed in public data gateways if they subscribe to a specific data quality, or if they meet some specific data quality or service level, data service level quality, to ensure consistency, to ensure, again, this level playing field that I was speaking before. Clearly, there are many other ways, but those are just a few, the main that comes to my mind.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Simone, for this. So I kind of will remember these 4 elements. So you talked about the infrastructure, you talk about the coordination between the stakeholder, you talked about the interoperability and portability, and then I think 4th element that you mentioned was everything around the incentives, and that very much, I think, resonates with us. I wish we could keep this fireside chat going for longer, because I'm sure that you and Foteini have a lot of other things to share with us that we couldn't unpack together here. But at the same time, I also would like to open the floor to the broader audience for Q&A. We have about like 12 minutes left, and knowing that we probably need at least two minutes to close. So I would maybe recommend to people to just raise their hand if they want to ask a question, and maybe try to keep it short. And then between Joanne, between Simone, Foteini, Elko and Joanna, we will try to answer them. So happy to open the floor now. Feel free to use the raise hand option, and then I will give you the floor. And then if no one is willing to come in, we can also go through some of the questions that have been shared in the chat. But just to make it more interactive, I would be keen to invite people to just chime in. Any questions, any remarks? It can also be ideas, of course, that you would like to share with us, and it can be on the session, it can be on the presentation, on the discussion with Foteini and Simone, of course. Okay, and maybe in the meantime, just in the interest of time, I'm on the WOVA platform, and I can see that there is one question that actually received 3 votes that I'm happy to give a first stab at it. And this is, are there systems that can lead to harmonized data for all players in agriculture value chain? I believe that this is something that we talked a bit about it. If we talk about systems from a technology perspective, there are ways to actually harmonize the metadata, the ontology. You have things like data dictionaries, systems like data lineage that can help to actually harmonize the data sources from different entities. My own perspective on this, if I want to keep it very short, again, in the interest of time, is that what is very often difficult, also echoing what Simone was saying, is to incentivize these different stakeholders to actually comply with certain standards. So from a technology perspective, there are many ways to actually support different stakeholders to stick to the same standards to ensure interoperability between different data sources and to have an harmonized data. But then it's not always easy to find a way to incentivize people to actually, again, leverage these standards. So just a quick answer, and then of course, if the rest of the presenters you want to add, I will also invite you to maybe raise your hand. I see a question from Ken that I personally know, so good to see you here, Ken, and I will just voice it over. So as digital agriculture specialist, a question to the panel and everyone, do you know any existing and effective data sovereignty mechanism in developed countries? And that's, I think, probably looking back at our example that we gave, and I will go back to this slide. I think that one very interesting one, to me at least, that I would invite you to have a look at is this example of the International Dairy Data Exchange Network that is quite advanced when it comes to an example more anchored in Europe, but very international. When it comes to the United States, an example that I have on top of my head is the FBN, so the Farmer Business Network, which actually raised some capital recently, so has some traction at the moment as well. So that's just 2 quick examples, but of course, if there are more people willing to share additional example to that question, which I think is a good one, please feel free to just chip in the chat. I will take another one from the chat here. Again, feel free to just also raise your hand and chime in here. I think the first question to me is what model we use to address such complex problem. Is it a national level, regional level, or local level? Yeah, that's a good question. And I believe that there are different ways to see things. Very often, I would look at the local regulation. So probably that in Europe, it makes sense as there is the GDPR, the Data Governance Act, and other of such regulations, it makes sense to look at beyond the national level. But then, of course, it also depends a bit on the group of farmers that you are looking at and the objectives. So it's a bit of a hard question to answer without really knowing about let's say, the use case for data sovereignty. And if we are looking at agricultural value chains, the type of value chain and the way these value chains are exposed to an international market or not, if we are talking about subsistence farming or more commercial farming, all these elements, from my perspective, again, I believe would lead to different approaches when it comes to the geography at which the data sovereignty model or program can be run. I'm just looking while waiting, and I see that on the platform we have another question that received actually 3 votes. There is data is the new frontier these days, and various countries have different laws to access some data. Are these laws affecting the pace and extent at which data would be used in agriculture? My quick answer to that one, or my 2 cents, is that yes. And I think if these regulations actually don't impact the pace and the extent, it probably means that they are not well enforced or not well understood or not efficient. But I think that this is the point of indeed having like new laws and regulations is to have an impact on the pace and the extent to which the data is shared. When it comes to data sovereignty, I think, and again, this is quite subjective, but one of the things that we've came up with this study is that the idea of data sovereignty is probably to restrict the misuse of data, and so avoid unfair and unethical use of data. But on the other side is to facilitate the use of data that is actually matching with the expectations, the needs, the wants of the individuals behind that data, but also the regulations. So yeah, in a quick answer, yes, these laws affect the pace and the extent at which the data would be used in agriculture, but they should be affecting it in a good way.
Sorry. Christophe, if
Please,
I may.
Fortini. Yes.
Yes, following what you said, within the privacy legislation in relation to the agricultural sector, we need to adjust it and taking into account exactly what I mentioned earlier, or what types of data we are processing in agriculture. For example, a name of address is a personal data, but soil and weather data is not considered personal data, for example. Or just to mention another regulation, it is an EU regulation, it is around the free flow of non-personal data, and goes hand in hand, I would say, with the GDPR, where it is stated there, interestingly, that agricultural data is not considered personal data, but still we need to have into consideration, for example, when we're processing data within location, whether a farmer can be identified or his farm, her farm can be identified, then there would also be the risk of having the identity of the farmer revealed. And like you correctly mentioned, the privacy legislation in general gives rights to the persons, and also they're trying to reduce any risks of misuse by setting up standards, security measures, anonymization, pseudonymization are some of these measures. So in overall, yes, we need to take into consideration a legislation. Sometimes it might be influence the pace, yes, of these developments in the agricultural sector. But on the other hand, it is essential to safeguard these rights. Consent of the farmer when he's providing his or her data. It is essential to mention also the right to information and access to the data that has provided, the right to erase or correct his or her data. these also are rights important to take into consideration. And if you ask me in a broader sense, it is essential to map the stakeholders, the different stakeholders in the data value chain, and measure the needs and interests of its actor. I think that is one of the key considerations for the data sovereignty and control that we are talking about. That's it from my part.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mentee and Christoph.
Yeah, please. I was on the way to give you back the floor as I see that the time is running, but please feel free to just follow up with us for more questions. And I already wanted to thank everyone for participating, but happy to give you back the floor, Elke, for some closing remarks. But it was a real pleasure to be here with everyone.
Thank you so much, Christoph. And exactly in the last minute, a thank you from our side as well from the ICTforAg. There were so many questions and such a lively virtual debate that I really have a feeling that this resonated a lot with you, that this really is an important topic just based on your big interest. And this is definitely not the end of the conversation. I think this conference is a platform to get things started, to get peer learning and exchange started. So hopefully there will be many follow-ups in the future on this. From the ICTforAg side, we are very excited about the study, and we will be publishing it very soon. So keep an eye out on the GIZ website for this so that you can deep dive, and hopefully that will answer some of your questions as well. So from our side, from Johanna and my side, thank you so much for joining. We hope to see you again soon on this topic when we start with certain projects as well, so that we can answer questions related to costs of different models, etc. So I think there's still a lot to be done, but we look forward to walking this journey with you on this very important topic. So thanks to all the speakers, to Dalberg Data Insights for this incredibly good study. And yeah, see you in the rest of the sessions. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.